If I started this review with the following, you would be convinced that this is a home run hit. The Age of Decadence is a turn-based isometric single-player RPG set in a low-magic post-apocalyptic fantasy world influenced by the decline of the Roman Empire. It offers a deep, skill-driven character system, various skill-based approaches to completing quests, meaningful choices and consequences, and complex dialogue options. With a unique Roman-inspired world and a classic CRPG, this 2015 title by Iron Tower Studios sounds like a possible hidden gem or a low-key banger like these new boy kids like to say. Let's not waste any more time and take a look at the Age of Decadence to see if it lives up to its conceptual hype. When you start the game, you can create your character with a handful of pre-made options. You have one of 8 backgrounds to choose from, which will change your starting equipment, your starting allegiance, and your starting quests. One of my favorite things about this game is that you don't have to be a combat-focused character at all. If you want to complete this game with a pacifist run, which I have done before as a merchant and lore master prior, it is absolutely possible. After you pick your background and move on next, you can adjust your main attributes as well as put points within combat skills and civic skills. For our character Marcus, I've picked the mercenary background, so we should experience quite a bit of combat. I want to have a shield and spear focused character, so I will put points into the spear and block skill respectively. Alright, so now we begin our journey as a mercenary in the Tavern of Terron, a small town currently ruled by House Darton. My job is to protect certain guests from assassins and whatever else may be attacking. This is where we are introduced to the dialogue system, which contains a ton of text and no voiceovers at all. This is honestly fine for me, but it is a lot of reading that you'll be needing to do. The writing itself is honestly a mixed bag to me. The world presented in the Age of Decadence is a dark post-apocalyptic world where everyone is suffering from events in the past. There's a ton of dialogue that you'll come across that explains different legends and myths of the past. What I like is that it's up to you as the player to piece things together, as many people are speaking of events they have never been a part of. However, the dialogue with the characters can boil down to some late 90s / early 2000s edgelord conversations. I usually don't have problems with this, but the profanity here is excessively used in order to give the whole life is so bad vibe. With that said, the world itself is pretty dang awesome. The world is completely submerged in mystery and intrigue that can only truly be learned from figuring things out yourself. My favorite moments in this game is when you're just out in the world exploring a new location someone told you about, or entering a new town learning about the local customs. It's moments like these that make me wish we got a true sequel to this game. But for now, let's get back on track to my character and his adventures. As I've mentioned prior, I went for a mainly combat build. This eventually led for me joining the Imperial Guard and entering my first mission disguised as a raider. There's plenty of combat in this playthrough, so let's talk about it. The combat is all turn-based with quite a bit of options at your disposal. Each action and movement you take will cost AP. When using a weapon, you have various attacks that can perform depending on your character skill level with that weapon. For example, the spear gives us a fast, medium, and powerful attack, along with attacks aimed to a specific body part. This is all fundamentally sound on paper, but here is where the problem comes in. The combat early on especially is absolutely brutal. You're often pitted in situations where you are outnumbered and maybe outclassed. Early on, you will have pretty basic weapons and equipment to work with, along with your skills not being very good. Therefore, you'll have a hard time hitting anything while you'll constantly get hit yourself. Using a one-handed spear, I have the additional challenge of not being able to pierce many armor types when using a fast attack. To be fair, the combat does get much easier as you learn new attacks and get better equipment. You can also create some consumables to help you out with alchemy if you have the right amount of skill points. Even though my character is a fighter through and through, I ended up spending some points in crafting to give him the ability to make his own armor and weapons. The crafting system is honestly pretty fun as you can discover stronger metals for you to work with. As you level up your crafting, you also get passive modifiers to put on your weapons and armor. You can also repair your armor and even decompose equipments to repurpose the materials for other things. It's pretty cool breaking down several pieces of steel equipment to eventually make your own powerful suit of armor. Now, I've mentioned skill points throughout this review, and that leads to another major flaw for me. When completing quests and doing combat, you'll gain a certain amount of skill points that you can spend on various skills. Many times you'll need to pass a skill check in order to get a certain outcome. This can be having the right amount of persuasion points to convince someone, the right amount of lore knowledge, or even having a very specific attribute amount that can't be adjusted through experience. This is especially brutal if you are running a pacifist route. It's impossible to know how many points you'll need invested in a certain skill until you've failed and gone through it prior. This makes save states damn near a requirement, or you'll be starting over very often. And after completing the Imperial questline in Terran, I am sent over to Madoran to continue my career as an Imperial Guard. Apologies if I'm skipping a lot of the story beats, it's just hard to talk about many things narratively without diving into spoilers. When you complete an act and travel to a new town, you are given a summary of the events that have taken place and your overall impact. It's cool to see this, although the ending unfortunately is presented in the same format. Due to all the various endings one can get based on how they influence the world, it's a shame that we couldn't get a bit more like a cutscene or just something a bit more impressive. And speaking of endings for an RPG, this game is surprisingly short. According to howlongtobeat.com, the Age of Decadence can be beaten within 12.5 hours. Honestly, you can complete this game in far less time, especially on non-competitive playthroughs. On one of my non-competitive playthroughs, I ended up beating this game within 8 hours. Still, I don't think the length is a huge detriment considering the low standard price point of $15. A short length can actually be a good thing, as it can help a game stay well paced without having to drag anything out. Unfortunately, this is one of those games where the journey is more impressive than the destination. Once you get towards the end game, the mystery of what you are tasked to look for is pretty underwhelming. The latter acts also feel rushed, like there wasn't enough time to flesh out a couple of the latter locations. Before we wrap it up, we should give a shout out to the soundtrack here. I was genuinely surprised how good the music is in Age of Decadence. So many great tracks that provide perfect ambiance when exploring the world. There's one in particular that sounds amazing and strangely peaceful in such a dark and twisted world. Great stuff all around, although the combat music gets very repetitive in combat playthroughs. Overall, the Age of Decadence is a very interesting but flawed RPG. I like how diverse you can make each character, from a walking nightmare killer build to a complete pacifist, and still get to the end. Unfortunately, the over-reliance of stat requirements leads to a ton of save scumming and a pure Iron Man playthrough, nearly impossible unless you have a guide handy. The combat, while solid fundamentally, often puts the players in unfair situations far too often, especially in the early game when you have barely any skill and equipment. Still, I'm always coming back to this one to see how many different paths there are to explore and how to influence the world with my sword or my words. Thank you all for watching as always, and this is Powerhouse, signing off.